darpam, kamam krodam parigraham, ahamkaram balam darpam, kamam krodam parigraham, vimuchya nirmama shanto, brahma bhuyaya kalpate, vimuchya nirmama shanto, brahma bhuyaya kalpate. Now we just do 2 times all together. Ahamkaram balam darpam, kamam krodam parigraham, vimuchya nirmama shanto, brahma bhuyaya kalpate. Ahamkaram balam darpam, kamam krodam parigraham. Those words one by one that we just chanted. Ahamkaram, egoism, I am the doerism. Balam, strength. Darpam, arrogance. Kamam, desire. Krodham, anger. Parigraham, covetousness. Vimuchya, having abandoned. Nirmamaha, without mind. Shantaha, peaceful. Brahma bhuyaya, for becoming Brahman. Kalpate, is fit. Brahma bhuta prasannatma, na shochati na kanchati, samasareshu bhuteshu, madbhaktim labhate param. This is verse 54 commentary. And here's what we just sang. Becoming Brahman, serene in the self, the seeker neither grieves nor desires. Treating all beings equally, the seeker attains a supreme devotion towards me. Here's the commentary. In the previous verse, it was stated that in order to be qualified to become Brahman, a seeker should renounce egoism, pride, arrogance, lustful desires, anger, and covetousness. In this verse, the Lord describes several further attainments required to become Brahman. As a result of being completely pure in mind, body, and senses, a seeker becomes free from all mental confusions and wrong undertakings about life in the world, and does not attach any importance to the outer world. This state is what is referred to as, quote, becoming Brahman, or Brahma Bhuta. In this way, a seeker transcends the unreal and constant. Questions, comments, and debate?
I think it's just important to mention that that's kind of like Krishna speaking poetically, because just as all the bodies in this room cannot become the bodies in the room, that's all they've ever been. You know, pure self, higher self has only always been known.
So the Gita says becoming Brahman, and he's just pointing out that it's a poetic expression because we always were, but we didn't know it. So realizing, I guess, is the word, self-realizing that we were. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
So can we say that Bhagavad Gita is non-dualist?
Can we say the Bhagavad Gita is non-dualist?
Non-dualist. That God and one, we are together, we're part of one, as opposed to God being separate and way away from us.
Dr. Prakash says, can we say that the Bhagavad Gita is non-dualist? Kind of ultimately it is, you know, because that's what they're going toward. Babaji's looking for his pen here. Dualism and non-dualism, because it approaches it dualistically because of the devotion. So we'll see how Babaji explains that. Duality means, or dualist means?
That two things are separate.
That things are separate, that we're separate from God.
And my idea of a strict non-dualist, you could never attain God consciousness. You'll never be part of God. You're always separate from God.
In the dualistic system. In the
that's my
dualistic
idea.
system.
There's
So
always that
he's
separation.
saying if we approach it from dualism, we're never God. We're separate from God if we think dualistically. So he's asking if the Gita could be called a dualistic text. But
Non-dualism.
Well, it appeared to be non-dualist to me, but then you pointed out devotion implies that someone's separate.
in the
from
poetry,
Right, yeah.
because a devotional person sees himself separate so that he can love something, you know. Is that right, Babaji? It's really non-dualistic, the Gita, but it uses dualism to achieve that, to bypass dualism. It's like taking the thorn out with a thorn in the Vedanta, they say. So you use it for the poetry of it. Good question, though, because sometimes it's hard to tell. Certain chapters are devotional, more devotional, but ultimately the undercurrent is just the eternal truth.
That God exists within us as us. Does Babaji believe that? God exists within us as us.
He says, would you say that God is within us as us? God is within us as we. The Gita explains it. So in this chapter it's called Karta, the doer, the underlying doer within the body. Can we say that? Yeah. They're talking here in this chapter because they're winding up all of the teachings. So they're saying it's ever present within us and it is us, but it's embodied and God is beyond the embodiment that's happening there in us. So it's how we look at ourselves, whether we're seeing ourselves as God or ourselves with God within. So that's why it's confusing about the dualism. Yeah, Ganapati does.
Isn't the awareness, the rising of the awareness that we're egotistical, we're acting out of some prideful thing, that in itself, isn't that what Sajjan sometimes talks about, already always present, reminding us that isn't that presence telling us to have inquiry, self-inquiry about a better way to experience the now?
So are you thinking that Atma is reminding Jivatma that it's using ego instead of understanding the pure self, which is who Krishna is and who Arjuna is? Krishna is reminding Arjuna all the time because Krishna represents the Atma.
It's not that we, as humans, it's not that we have the answer how saturated we are in our ego, but it's Atman reminding us
The higher self?
that we are the higher self.
Yeah.
And not that we have the answer to getting back to that.
Okay. Babaji, he's saying, is it that the higher self within us is reminding the ego self, or can remind the ego self that there is the higher self and that we are partaking in it? Can you get the other one? God is within, oh, that was the previous. Self is one or two. Self with a capital S is one, and then there's a small s self, the Jivatma, and then there seem to be two. But he's saying the self within, the ultimate self, or the higher self, or Atma, or Krishna, would be there to remind the lower self when it's egotism, when it's in ahankar. So we kind of catch ourselves. Is that what you mean, Ganapati Das?
Well, it's that, the revelation, as you have self-inquiry and you analyze how you're saturated in your ego or whatever, and all of that, that really isn't the moment of liberation. The moment of liberation is when you recognize you're in your ego.
There's no discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, the Gita is essentially a monistic, or one absolute, although it takes from the traditions of all the other schools, Samkhya included, which deals with dualistic, Prakriti being the material aspect, and Purush the divine aspect, or consciousness and nature. But the Gita does take more the Vedantic position, which is that there is one absolute. And it relates to your question in the sense that consciousness is the same within everybody. There is only one consciousness. What separates human beings from that realization is, for the Vedanta, which the Gita essentially takes, is that divine consciousness, so pure, as it shines through the intellect of any human being, one loses the knowledge of that divine spark and identifies with the intellect and the mind. So that becomes a barrier to pure consciousness itself. Because once we identify with the intellect, the mind, manas, and vigyan, the mind, one then begins to take on a separate identity with a name and a form. The body is the form and the name, and then sees everything in terms of duality, subject-object relationships. The idea then being to introvert, go inside again, try to still the mind so much that pure consciousness shines in and of itself without any identification with mind and body. So both questions are very good and related in that sense.
Let's see, Babaji was going to add something. Then we'll ask, what were you going to add there? You started to write. How to know who am I? You were saying...
Is it necessary to endlessly explore the story of me?
He's saying, is it necessary to explore who am I, the story of me? But that would be at the ego or dualistic level. Babaji's asking, how do we know who I am? The true essential nature? How do we know that? So sometimes by stilling the mind, and sometimes by devotion, as they're saying here. Sajjan knows.
The question, who am I, is not intended, it was not originally intended by Ramana Maharshi nor by any of the current successors of that school of thought of self-inquiry, who am I. It's not intended to dissect the story of me, because, as you say, there really is no need to keep kind of dwelling on one's story. So the question, who am I, is directed towards discovering what is the true nature of the true I, the true self, like that. And when the experience that's been discovered down through the decades is that when one actually takes the time, energy, and has the interest to go looking for the true I, that they don't find an actual thing, an object like that. They don't find something that they could label and pinpoint, like, oh, there I am, right there, when they look within. And so in most cases, when someone goes through that sadhana and does not find a thing, either gross or subtle, they kind of get the feeling, oh, I must have missed it, I must have made a mistake, but I have to try again. But the truth is that they didn't make a mistake. They didn't blow it, so to speak, because there is, because the true self, pure spirit, Brahm, is not an object which can be perceived or cognized with the senses or the mind or the intellect like that. But rather, it's always the pure light of awareness which is seeing the very effort to do the looking. Or as St. Francis of Assisi said, that which you are looking for is what is doing the looking.
Yeah.
I have a question about if one is meditating on God and the qualities of God and becomes aware that, for example, if I'm doing that and I become aware that seeing or to surrender myself to the qualities of God when I'm contemplating.
He's saying if you're meditating on God, is it appropriate to surrender yourself to the qualities of God, such as the consciousness? And they've been saying earlier, like in 13, it tells you all the qualities of God. And in other places it says the yogi should have those qualities. So they keep finding a way for us to introject them, if you would say in modern psychology. Identify and interject.
More of an experience of what God is.
Experiencing what God is through your own consciousness.
Right.
If the mind can't answer, who am I, then what is the answer? Were you going to say something more?
Just going to jump in on this question of who am I? For me, Babaji, it's when I hear that question, and over the many years I have seen people come up to Babaji with that sudden, almost a deep understanding, and they say to Babaji, Babaji, I've come to ask the question, who am I? And I've seen Babaji smile at that time too, because as I have come to understand it, looking at the examples over the years where I've been present when that question has been asked, I see the beginning of spiritual awakening. That it's the first time, as you were asking, I think, in a question earlier, is there something in there that's telling us it's always there? When one begins to ask the question, who am I, they have gone to a different level of understanding their own nature. They've come to the realization that there is something far more than their own identity with name and form. They've come to the realization, or perhaps the beginning of the spiritual inquiry that brings us all together. For example, here, all of you people in here, in one way or another, I'm convinced of this, have asked that very question. Maybe not in the words, who am I, but in similar words, beginning to explore the very, very nature which takes us beyond the everyday ego experience. It's the awakening of spiritual truth, as I understand it.
He's talking about the awakening of spiritual truth comes from, first of all, maybe wondering who we are, who all of us are, and taking in the ideas from the Gita and the Upanishads and things. What is your answer to who am I? He's trying to provoke us to think. When you get to be my age, you're saying, where am I? Babaji says it's unknown, the answer. Chandrakala, remember when Ramdas came back from India? Babaji, you taught Ramdas about Atma-Vichara, or at least he said you did. And he came back and he talked for days on different lectures about who am I am nothing, I am not this, I am not that. And but he was just full of Ramdas at the same time at that time. But remember when Ramdas came back from India at the beginning? I don't know, we were here when he did that. And that was his major teaching that he said he got from Babaji, among other things, was who am I? Nothing, I'm not this, I'm not that. And he was recommending that. You were pointing to Ganapati Das, was that you?
As a augment or a segue, is that the difference between Vedanta and psychology?
Mm-hmm. Let's ask Don to address that. Dr. Davies, would you? Because of the psychology. He was saying what's the difference between Vedanta and psychology, and I asked Dr. Don.
Western psychology, up until the time of Jung and transpersonal psychotherapy, is basically an ego-based psychology. It studies the development of the ego, it looks at ego deficiency and the struggles that the ego has and that we have to the extent that we inhabit our egos. Asian psychology and philosophy posits that there is a self, there is a core of value which is outside the ego and outside of what happens to an individual as they move through time. So that's a fundamental distinction between the psychologies of East and West for the most part. Again, Jung began to change that, transpersonal psychology and psychotherapy started to look at other dimensions beyond the ego. So they've extended that.
Yeah, Pramada.
There's a nice sutra that comes around on the computers. It says, we cannot describe it, we can only reveal it, and when we do, we disappear. It's one
Would
of
you say it
Babaji's.
louder for everybody in the back?
We cannot describe it, we can only reveal it, and when we do, we disappear.
Who wrote that?
Babaji.
Babaji. You wrote that. Thank you.
We have spoken about before Om Tat Sat. And we said that Tat translates into that. And that is all that is. So if we say I am that, we are affirming that we are God, all that is. So I am that. I am.
Hamsa. It says that's the mantra for that. Aham Saha. And then it comes Hamsa Soham. I am that, he said. It's a good way to say it because it's pretty hard to figure out how to say it. So that's a good way. Yes?
That's one of the great statements in Vedanta. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahma.
Yeah, what is God, Babaji says?
The great central sun.
The great central what?
Sun.
Couldn't tell what word that was. Where's
Sun.
that?
Sun.
Is that sun?
God is the one expressing as the all.
God is the one expressing as the all. Sashan's answer is God is the one expressing as the all. In chapter 10 and chapter 11. Who am I? And then the am, people think of it as what others say you are at the dualistic level. We keep looking for the answer in what people think of us. Yeah. Right up?
Boy, who am I? You can say that I am, which is the first step down into the manifest world from the unknown.
He's saying if we say who am I and then we say that I am, that's the first step down into the manifest world.
From the unknown.
Well, it depends what you're saying that is, though. That is all-encompassing. I am that.
Well, then all the debate begins. It's narrowly said, I am.
Yes, there's a lady back here. Is this our filmmaker from the Rainbow Gathering? Hi.
I was given the name Allah.
What is your name?
Allah.
Allah?
Allah.
Allah?
Gave me
Babaji gave you? Allah?
I'm grateful to be in this conversation and to be hearing so many who are seeking to be on the path. And I must say, Babaji, your life is more than just being on the path in terms of ideals or concepts. You have lived it in the community life you have offered and how you have taught many others. You could have stayed in the cave and just reached amazing levels of Brahmahood, but instead you came here to teach, to grow a community, and I believe that it is not so much for me, perhaps it's only my perception, but it's not so much what we achieve of our ultimate non-dualistic oneness with God, yet how we express it in the world of service. How do we give this to others in our lives? And that's why I'm here, to study Gandhi and Babaji and others who have given others so much inspiration towards the light of what it is to be a seeker in their life, in what they actually achieved by teaching and reaching out in their service, life of service.
She's first of all thanking you for the example that you have set for all of us by coming here and serving others and teaching us and being willing and patient with us. And she's saying that ultimately it seems that what we can do in spirituality is seek a life of service, which the Gita very strongly supports.
So the idea of dualism is just to teach us the language of what to understand is not dualistic. Because you can't, until you have a language of what is dualistic, you can be there like a baby, a yogi baby. A yogi baby is just there. They're in total bliss, right? But then as we learn by life and people misinterpret our words and our deeds and we get very confused, and you're right, other people become that impression. But ultimately, if we can make a community that reflects I am, and we live more and more and aspire to live more of I am, then we can hopefully continue the growth of this ongoing, never-ending journey into I am.
She's saying as we use service as a method, we begin to understand who I am, which is all of us. You'd like a verse that Babaji once told me, which is, the true yogi sees the pain and pleasure of others as his own, which is a nice verse in the middle of the chapter 5. Thank you. Okay, this is a question. I have a friend, wait a minute, I'm going to need these. I have a friend who divorced her abusive, lazy, no good husband years ago. Yay! Since then, her children blame her for breaking up the family and don't speak to her. My friend thinks that this might be because she may have been a bad mother in a previous life. What do you think? Is karma that simple? And does anyone really know? Do you want to read it yourself, or should I reread it? I'll read it, it's kind of long. I have a friend who divorced her abusive, lazy, no good husband years ago. Is that you? Since then, her children blame her for breaking up the family and don't speak to her. My friend thinks this might be because she may have been a bad mother in a previous life. What do you think? Is karma that simple? And does anyone really know? I'll put it right here so you can refer to it. Unknown answer is to tell previous life. It's unknown what the previous life is. Yeah. So yes.
We don't know, that's an easy answer. When we don't know, that's an easy answer. Oh, it must be your past life.
And he's also saying you can't know the previous life. Yeah, Don wants to weigh in.
Kids usually blame the mother.
Mm-hmm. Right, yes.
And usually often the healthier parent in that situation takes the most flack.
He says the kids usually blame the mother in similar situations, and the healthier parent
usually gets the most blame.
Gets the most blame or the most flack. Our time's up. I'm sorry because there's probably more about that, the blame game, but our 10 o'clock is here, so we'll sing our prayer. So we'll do our prayer.
Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, Sarve santu niramaya,